names joining the webinar. So good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. Thank you very much for being with us. These are some unusual times, and we know it's not easy for everyone to actually be online and be part of this conversation. However, we do believe that this is not a conversation that is totally unrelated to current discussions, but just another opportunity to get to the structural issues and a good opportunity to tackle how these structural gendered issues are also impacting in different ways depending on where you are, right? And in this case, we're speaking about the rural areas. So yeah, my name is Andrea Nuila. I am part of the VN International team. I am based in Heidelberg, Germany, originally from Honduras, and I do the work on rights of peasants. So I coordinate rights of peasants, and I'm also part of the justiciability program. So I'm really happy to have some great panelists with us today. First, we have Gabriella, Valentin, Diaz, and Crawford. They are both legal students. They have been working on rural women's rights at the University Clinic, Human Rights Clinic of the University of Miami. And I will give the floor to them before we get to the next panelists. So thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Andrea. Let's see, let's start the PowerPoint.
Should I share it?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay, 1 second, I'll try.
Thank you. Perfect. Hello? Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can we ask you to mute yourself, please? Fatu, can you mute yourself, please?
Yes.
Thanks. Maria, we're about to start. You should hear us. And just please let us all know if you can hear us.
Okay.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So as Andrea said, my name is Gabriella Valentin. I'm a second-year law student at the University of Miami School of Law, and I'm presenting today on behalf of the University of Miami Human Rights Clinic. As you will see from the next slide, if you could please go to the next slide. Can you hear me?
Yes, it should be the next slide. Can you see it?
No, Isabel, you have to present. You have to go to the full screen.
Yeah, I'm at the full screen. Wait a sec.
Sorry, everyone. We're having some technical issues with the PowerPoint. Oh, it's not PowerPoint, I think.
So I'll just open it again. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
It seems okay. It seems to be unable to upload.
Okay.
I don't know.
I think I can try sharing my screen if you would like.
If you can, if it's possible, yes.
Mhm. Is everybody able to see this?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, sounds good. I'll go ahead and start over. My name is Gabriella Valentin Diaz, and I am a second-year law student at the University of Miami School of Law. I am here presenting today on behalf of the University of Miami School of Law Human Rights Clinic. If you'll see it from this photo, I'm the one furthest to the left in this, and Kadian, who you will be hearing from right after me, is just to the right of me. The Human Rights Clinic works for the promotion of justice globally and in the US. The clinic is staffed by 3 human rights lawyers who supervise law students, human rights litigation, and advocacy at all levels by engaging in multidimensional advocacy strategies, including documentation and report writing, litigation, media engagement, working with legislative and administrative bodies, campaigning, community organizing, and global networking. We also develop practical solutions to promote accountability on the part of state and non-state actors. Kaden and I have actually focused our work on the right to food and had the privilege of working with and supporting advocacy groups on the rights of rural women, among other things. Our presentation today is going to focus on CDAW General Recommendation 34 as a significant legal framework for the realization of the right to food of rural women and its links with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants. I will first describe CDAW General Recommendation 34 generally and its similarities to UNDROP. For a brief introduction to General Recommendation 34, general recommendations are issued by the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women on issues which they believe states should devote more attention to. General Recommendation 34 was adopted in 2016 and its focus of rural women, and it's the authoritative interpretation of Article 14 of the CEDAW Convention. It states obligations and non-exhaustively the rights that the states must address. Generally, General Recommendation 34 recognizes the often unseen and underappreciated contributions of rural women, and these include policy initiatives, gender-responsive approaches to current systems.
Gabriella, sorry to interrupt you. Can you speak a bit slower? People are having trouble following you.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to keep everything within the time limit. I'll go ahead and try to speak a little slower. So the acknowledgement of the contribution of rural women serves as the basis of the discussion and identification of specific ways to improve the current condition of these women. And there are ways that are provided to address the conditions of these women, and they include policy initiatives, gender-responsive approaches to current systems, the full accessibility of rights, and the accessibility to justice for any violations of these rights. General Recommendation 34 also emphasizes the need for rural women to be involved in the decision-making roles in communities. And these roles are currently not as accessible to women as they should be because of longstanding discrimination. Discrimination is an overlapping concern throughout General Recommendation 34, and addressing it is often one of the steps that the recommendation lists is necessary to really make change in regard to a specific right. Discrimination can be intersectional and can be deeply rooted in existing legal and societal systems. And when it comes to the right to food, this isn't different at all. Now I'll briefly talk about the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Peasants. This declaration is a result of a very long advocacy process, which was led by social movements. You'll actually be hearing from Nettie right after myself, who is from La Via Campesina, one of the social movements that was very involved in this declaration. This document is an elaboration on the rights of peasants and other people who work in rural areas. And it includes many sectors of rural areas. It includes artisanal and small-scale agriculture, crop planting, livestock raising, pastoralism, fishing, forestry, hunting, gathering, and different groups like Indigenous and nomadic people, among others. UNDROP, like General Recommendation 34, addresses issues like climate change, the forgotten contributions of rural peoples and the lack of opportunities available to them. Actually, the largest connection between UNDROP and General Recommendation 34 is that Article 4 of UNDROP, which you can see on the screen right now, this article deals with the rights of rural women, and it actually takes the language directly from CEDAW General Recommendation, or actually CEDAW, the Convention for CEDAW in Article 14, which is displayed now. They tackle many of the same issues, such as discrimination and policy, involving rights like health, economic life, employment, education, and access to land, among other things. Before we continue, I also want to touch a little bit on how international are interpreted. Article 31 of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties discusses the general rule of interpretation of treaties. Article 31, Section 1 states that treaties shall be interpreted in good faith in accordance with the ordinary meaning to be given to the terms of the treaty and their context and in the light of its object and purpose. And then Article 31, Section 2 states that the context for the purpose of the interpretation of a treaty shall comprise, in addition to the text, including its preamble and annexes. And what's important about this is that if you actually look at UNDROP's annex, it includes a paragraph where it takes into account CEDAW. And just to move on to get a little bit more of a complete sense of the similarities between UNDROP and General Recommendation 34, I'm going to elaborate a little bit on some of the rights outlined in General Recommendation 34, which can help us interpret Article 4 of UNDROP. Before I go ahead and summarize some of these, it's important to note how these are relevant to the right to food. One of the preeminent human rights principles is the interdependency of human rights. And this really just means that the inability to access one right directly affects the ability to fulfill another right. There are 9 total sections that are elaborated on in General Recommendation 34, and those are the ones listed here. For the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and summarize 3 or 4 of them. But as I go through them, you will see that all of these rights relate to the economic side of accessing food, the physical ability to access food, and the ability to access natural resources needed to produce food. The first one I'll elaborate on is the economic and social life. For this section, the committee acknowledges that rural women don't enjoy the free pursuit of economic and social prosperity. As such, they have to have access to social security at all times, and this has to be achieved considering the unpaid and unregulated forms of work rural women often engage in as a result of the limited opportunities that are available to them. Rural women should also have income security and access to healthcare and childcare facilities at all times. Another really important one specifically to the right to food is employment. Regarding employment, the committee states that rural women also have limited labor opportunities. Diverse employment opportunities should be available to these women, and they should be properly compensated, and they should include maternity leave and security, have a safe and adequate work environment, and should be free from all forms of abuse. It should also protect from exposure to harmful chemicals and pesticides through legislation and public awareness programs. Laws and policies that prevent rural women from obtaining certain jobs should be eliminated. States must also facilitate women's ability to obtain adequate employment by ensuring their right to collective bargaining, social security, and childcare, among other things. Political and public life, and the commitment is that rural women have often been excluded from decision roles in their communities. Women have the right to participate in decision-making at all levels, including land, forestry, fishery, and water governance bodies, as well as natural resource management. These women must also be properly represented. States must actively ensure that the meaningful participation of rural women is fulfilled by establishing quotas and ensuring they can influence policy, addressing power discrepancies between men and women, and ensuring their participation in the implementation of rural development projects. And now one that, of course, is very important to the food, land, natural resources. With respect to land and natural resources, the exercise of rural women is very limited. Much of the land in rural areas is controlled by men. So to ensure equal and non-discriminatory access, state parties should address discriminatory stereotypes and practices that prevent women from accessing land and natural resources. And they should take all necessary steps to achieve equality. Rural women must occupy positions of power to fully ensure their own access to rights such as land and natural resources. And agricultural policies should support women farmers. They should also promote sustainable practices that respect and protect the traditional and eco-friendly agricultural knowledge that women possess. Rural women are actually the most at-risk group for food insecurity, malnutrition, and hunger. So combat this, states should ensure the right to food through food sovereignty so that women who live or work in rural areas can control and manage their natural resources. And just to wrap up, General Recommendation 34 also includes some very innovative rights, and these include the right to food sovereignty, the protection of natural commons, the right to seeds, the right to participate in the management of natural resources, and the right to participate in the development of policy. All of these are also overlaps in UNDROP. That concludes my part of the presentation, but I'll now pass it on to Kadian, who will talk a little bit more about this.
Thank you, Gabriella. Hello, everyone. My name is Katie, and I will briefly talk about the specific instances in which the clinic makes use of CEDAW General Recommendation 34 in its local level work. So according to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is a federal agency that enforces civil rights in the workplace harassment remains a persistent and underreported problem in the United States. Women are forced to work in hostile environments where they experience various forms of misconduct. Women are asked for sexual favors, are exposed to inappropriate jokes and comments, insinuations, genitalia, and unwanted physical contact that sometimes results in rape. The clinic partners with the Voces Unidas Coalition, which is made up of 3 organizations: We Count, Miami Workers Center, and the Community Justice Project, to serve farm workers, plant nursery workers, and domestic workers in South Florida. We focus primarily on issues of sexual harassment and sexual violence in the world of work. Part of the work that Voces Unidas does is support agricultural workers in Homestead, a more rural area in South Florida. In our work with workers in Homestead, we have had focus groups with women in which women have talked about their experiences with sexual harassment in the workplace, wage theft, pesticide use, and domestic violence. In this work, we have used human rights frameworks such as CEDAW, UNDROP, and ILO for our work. There's also a campaign called Cities for CEDAW, and it is a grassroots effort that provides tools and leadership to empower local women's organizations and municipalities to effectively adopt the principles of CEDAW within their city, county, or state. Miami actually a CEDAW city. What this means is that Miami vows to adhere to the principles of CEDAW as part of its laws. The fact that Miami is a CEDAW city, actually Miami-Dade County has a CEDAW ordinance. The fact that we do have this ordinance enables an analysis of the situation of low-wage immigrant women's experiences with workplace sexual harassment in Miami using CEDAW, more specifically, CEDAW General Recommendation 34 as the framework. This is quite significant because the U.S. has not ratified CEDAW on a federal level. The Miami-Dade County Ordinance enables us to use a human rights framework at the local level in spite of the U.S.'s lack of ratification. CEDAW General Recommendation 34, paragraph E, urges states to provide women who live and or work in rural areas with adequate work that is properly compensated, safe and free from sexual harassment, exploitation, and other types of abuse. However, what we've seen in South Florida is farm workers and plant nursery workers who have experienced sexual harassment in the workplace by the hands of their supervisors and other workers. We've seen workers whose immigration documents are being held by their employers and used against them to keep them in line. And we have seen workers not being paid adequate wages for their work. CEDAW General Recommendation 34, paragraph H also charges states to ensure affordable and safe access to transportation so that women who live in rural areas can have adequate access to many of their rights. This poses an added problem in the world of work when a low-paid woman has experienced sexual harassment, because many low-paid women workers who work in rural areas rely on their employers for transportation to and from work. If their employer or a fellow employee is sexually harassing or sexually abusing a woman, lack of alternative transportation to a site where they can report can be a barrier to reporting that sexual harassment or sexual abuse. In addition to CEDAW General Recommendation 34 and UNDROP, recently adopted ILO Convention 190 also provides a useful framework when thinking about gender-based violence in the place of work. It protects workers and other persons in the world of work in both urban and rural areas. It states that each member that ratifies the convention shall respect, promote, and realize the right of everyone to a world of work free from violence and harassment. In order to further preventing and eliminating violence and harassment in the world of work, the convention asks states to respect, promote, and realize the right to work, namely freedom of association and effective recognition of the right to collective bargaining, the elimination of forced or compulsory labor, and the promotion of decent work. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to both of you for this very in-depth, in a very short time, and establishing also the links between CEDAW General Recommendation 34 and UNDROP, and also sharing this very interesting experience of implementing an international instrument at the local level with all the constraints you can have in the US. So now I will give the word to Nettie Wiebe, representing La Via Campesina and speaking to us all the way from Canada. Nettie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
All right. I'll just introduce myself a bit. I'm Nettie Wiebe. I'm a farmer, organic farmer in Saskatchewan, Canada, where the ground is still covered with snow. So we're not out there yet farming, but we're getting ourselves ready. I can't start without noting that we and many others in the world are confronting a pandemic, which will be not only a severe test for our food systems and our right to food, but will also disproportionately affect women, because we are very often in our households and in our communities the caregivers, and we are the people who look to food security in our households and communities. So this global pandemic that we're confronting will have a huge impact, and will demonstrate yet again the vulnerabilities of the globalized food systems. But that's another subject which has to be discussed in another time. I'll just start by saying that it's no secret that rural women have a huge role to play in food production. small-scale farmers, peasants, artisanal fishers, and pastoralists, we are actually producing about 80% of the food in the world. So this is a huge component of our global food security, and women play a huge role in it. And our role is increasingly difficult because there's growing inequalities in food systems and food production. And there's a tremendous pressure on the resources by industrial projects and ecological destruction, climate change, and all of this. On all of this, women are at the front of suffering it and also dealing with it. The insecurity and the violence we experience in the countryside is not just visited upon us. We're also dealing with it, and that was a part of the genesis of the Via Campesina, that rural people, small-scale farmers, peasants, wanted to not only have to suffer the consequences, but actually have a voice in and work to change the world. And the whole UN initiative for the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other peoples working in rural areas came out of the Via Campesina and came out of our drive to take our rightful places and be change agents to transform the world around us to a more just, ecologically sustainable and equal, egalitarian world where the right to food was genuinely realized. When I have to say that I was on the coordinating council of the Via Campesina when this first came up, and it was proposed by the peasant leadership from Indonesia, that we would try and get a United Nations Declaration on Peasants' Rights. And I have to say that I was skeptical of it. I thought that the United Nations is a very distant, very bureaucratic global agency, and we would expend a lot of time and energy, and we wouldn't get very far. And the first part of that was right. We did spend a lot of time. It took 17 years to get the declaration ratified. But the energy, I think, in retrospect, was very well spent. I think that declaration has made and is beginning to make and has tremendous potential to make a huge difference in terms of not only how we see ourselves and what our openings are as rural peoples to assert ourselves and assert our rights, but also to change the discourse and change the perspective that others have of our role and our rights. And this is particularly true of women. And the previous presenter has just outlined the importance and the language from previous documents, GR34 and others, that emphasize the role of women and the rights of women. But the declaration, the Peasants' Declaration, broadens and deepens the rights discourse and moves it beyond what we in so-called industrialized nations have been so keen on, which is just individual rights, moves it to asserting collective rights. And particularly the collective rights of those of us, those peoples in rural areas who are on the front lines of taking care of water, of soils, of seeds, and so on and so forth. And women are huge participants in all of that. The Declaration also indicates, and you've said this already, that it also demonstrates the interconnectedness, the interdependency of rights, the indivisibility of rights, and how they're related to each other. And that's really important for women, that that our rights are not subsumed under or taken as also asserted when general rights are asserted. That it's clear that our rights as full participants have a special place in this. We live in a patriarchy, and in rural areas, in agriculture, in the jurisdiction over land and fisheries, that's a deep patriarchy. It's deeply embedded in many of our systems around the world. So that's what women in rural areas have historically lived with, and that's where we are still. But this declaration begins to, or continues to assert that that isn't a given. We can change that. We can actually move past that. I'm just going to share with you what Via Campesina has recently released, which is just a series of lively little illustrations of what the declaration highlights in terms of women's rights. I'll just see if I can make this work. Are you seeing the illustration?
No.
It's the illustration of a booklet.
Not yet.
I think you
Not yet.
have to first share your screen and then show us the presentation.
Did that work? Are you seeing
Not,
it?
not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
At the bottom of your screen, there should be something
Yes,
shared.
I'm sharing my screen.
Yeah, okay.
Sharing the screen.
Now.
Now we have
Yeah.
it.
Now
Perfect.
you're seeing it?
Yes,
Okay.
we have.
Perfect, thank you.
Looking at me and look at some other illustrations of just what the Via Campesina has put out here, and it illustrates the are you seeing that one now? That rural women. Are you seeing that?
Yes.
Yes, all right. That rural women, peasant and rural women have rights, and it's just the assertion of that, the dramatic assertion of that that's important here. That we have agency, and it always still astonishes me when I go into international meetings. That we have to fight for this space, decision-making space. That very often those meetings are still captured almost entirely by males, sometimes our peasant counterparts, but most often other decision makers who decide and prescribe the world for us. And this document, this Declaration of Peasant Rights, very clearly indicates that we have agency, and we need to, and we can assert that. We have the right to assert that. I'm just going to go through some of these that have already been noted. That there's a demand for better public services in rural areas. And that won't surprise anybody that we've been neglected for far too long, and that that women suffer the consequences of the lack of these services. That we need better education, better schools, equal opportunities. That's very important for our livelihoods and our families. This is a key one that we have to have the right to land, seeds, and natural resources on an equal basis. And this is at the core, at the heart of the struggle for food sovereignty, that the control over food producing resources should be in the hands of those who are actually producing the food, not the corporate sector, not the financiers, but those, and that's many times the hands of women, that we should actually have access to and control over those resources. There's a struggle on all of those, on seeds, on land, on water, on all of those natural resources, a struggle for control over them. This doesn't come as any surprise that we should have political rights, that we have the right to organize and to be paid fair wages for our work. That's already been emphasized by the previous speaker. That we have the right not to be poisoned and to have our environments poisoned, our soils, our waters, the air polluted. And this is a deep struggle. This has been a long-standing struggle. When I first started in the Via Campesina, when we first started in the early 90s, we women began to organize ourselves, the recurring cry from women in all parts of the world we talked to were that we were working on trying to protect the health of ourselves and our children against what is an increasingly poisoned world. And we understand that that's our bodies, our children that are on the line there. And that's part of the huge push for agroecology to get rid of, hold accountable those who are poisoning the environments around us. And the whole agroecology push, of course, indicates, and we've always known this, that we can produce food, and we can produce food in a plentiful way, in a healthy way, without those toxic inputs. In fact, we can do it far better without them. So that's the struggle for the right to food sovereignty, healthy and fair food. And that isn't just rural women's struggle. That, I must remind you, is everybody's struggle, because we're all eaters, and healthy food matters to all of us. And of course, we cannot be safe, we cannot live fully, we cannot be full citizens participating in decision making if we are always afraid. And that means that the violence against women has to end. That's been a campaign in the Via Campesina for decades, and it's a continuing demand that we be safe, that we have the right to protect our places, our resources, our territories, and that that we're not be subject to violence, physical, sexual harassment, and violence when we do that. I think I should end there. I've probably used more than my time. I'll just return very briefly in the end to say that there's an important little piece, for me anyway, in Article 26.1 of the UNDROP that specifically, I think, highlights what I've said, or takes account of what I've said about us living in a patriarchy. And this is not just now, this is deeply embedded and traditional. And this article specifically says that the traditional patriarchal cultural practices must be overridden by and give way to the human rights of women, the right to equality. I'll end there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nettie, for this background. and reflections. Quickly, I will move forward to Fatou Kamara. She is joining us from Gambia. She is a member of the World Forum of Fisher People, and her local organization, the National Association of Artisanal Fisheries Operation. We're really happy to have you here. So yeah, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. As you said, I am Fatou Kamara from Gambia, member of National Artisanal Fisheries Corporation and member of WFFP Food Sovereignty Fisheries Working Group. Yeah, I would like to present the definition of women in small-scale fisheries sector. Women play a vital role in small-scale
Fatou, sorry to interrupt you. We're having some difficulties hearing you clearly.
Okay.
Maybe if something with your microphone.
Okay. Okay. Are you getting me clearly?
I think that's better. Maybe if you just come a little bit closer.
Yeah. Are you getting me?
With the microphone. Yes.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I am Fatou Kamara from Gambia, member of National Artisanal Fisheries Corporation and member of WFSP Food Sovereignty Fisheries Working Group. I would like to present the significant role of women in fisheries sector. Women play a vital role in small-scale fisheries sector, like offloading, processing, marketing, and yet they are excluded from decision-making stage. Women face a lot of challenge and impact, land grabbing, climate change, sexual harassment, and a lot of more. Access to results. Most of women often finance season 3 with agreement that they will have first choice of the fish catch. Some access to the fish by obtaining from their husband or their family member. Others from relationships or buying the fish from the fishers or traders. Okay. Gender equity. Women should be a key principle in every movement. Women should lead, should play a leading role, and should be constantly prioritized. We need in our movement. Women play a lot of role in fisheries, small-scale fisheries sector, yet they are not part of decision-making stage. In order to make these women to be part of decision-making stage, United Nations and FAO should make these women to be part of this decision-making stage. So that's all what I will present for today. I thank you all.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's all.
Are you done? Okay, perfect.
Yeah, that's all.
Great. Well, then, thank you very much. I would like to just quickly go give some concluding remarks before opening the discussion. So I will also share my screen. So hopefully everybody is able to see it. Right, so I think several important issues. Of course, I think some other important issues are going to come up, but I think that we addressed maybe three very important points. One is, so UNDROP actually reflects this different realities or different ways women experience their lives in rural areas. Nettie was saying, which I didn't have time to include there, your last remark on how UNDROP also highlights, in a way, the patriarchal system that rules not only in rural areas, but in general for women. Then we had some specific references to the contributions that UNDROP actually offers to the struggle of women in rural areas, and I would say also the struggle for the food sovereignty project, right? And one is, of course, reinforces the political agency of women. UNDROP deepens this right discourse, and I would say actually it changes the way we have interpreted the entitlements in international human rights law. So more commonly defined as individual rights, and the people as individuals versus the state. And now we have taken a step forward and basically recreate a narrative, and envision people, human rights, not only as individual rights, but also as collective rights. And Nettie also said it reinforces the interconnectedness of rights, important for women, especially, so that it's not only about recognizing certain rights, the rights that I like, but all of them. And we can see that those examples when we speak about participation, for example. Then, well, UNDROP emphasizes on the control over productive resources, and especially I think that we can make this link with the right to food and food sovereignty being recognized in the declaration. Food sovereignty, especially, as the first time that it's recognized in international human rights law. And it sets a basis for the agroecological project. I don't know if that was the magnitude in which Nettie meant it, but I think that it actually, I think the pillars are there, and it's interesting to see it in that way. And I would say that the last issue that came up, and this was tackled by Gabriella and Katie, was, okay, so there are some gaps, but there are rules of interpretation that we can use, and this is, of course, in a more formal, legalistic way of seeing it, but there are references and sources that already exist previously to the declaration, and that they can be also complementary. And we tackled the specific case of General Recommendation 34, but of course we have the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and other human rights instruments, but also other political international instruments that can be helpful for our interpretation of the declaration. And so with this very quick wrap up, I would like to open the floor. I think that we really have very interesting people here. I see, for example, Mariam. I see Saulo. I see people that have been working on the, well, Nadia Lambeck, on the food sovereignty project for a lot of time. And I think that it would be great for all of you to, yeah, share your comments and questions to the group. So I see some hands. Isabel will take care of
yes, thank you, Andrea. I see Samina. If you have to unmute yourself, and then you have the floor. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Samina, you need to unmute yourself and then we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Samina and I'm speaking from Pakistan. Should I continue?
Yes, please. We hear you clearly.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for this very inspiring conversation. I really appreciated all the speakers. Just very quickly, my organization works with rural women in Pakistan. And one of our effort is to get recognition for women farmers as workers in the national GDP and in policy making and decision making. So one of the strategy we have used is the United Nations General Assembly resolution of 2007 that recognized 15th October as the International Day of Rural Women. So every year we organize a big conference in the capital of Pakistan, Islamabad, and we bring together thousands of women to interact with policymakers and to make demands. And we have been doing this for 12 consecutive years. And what that has done is created a collective platform for women farmers in Pakistan. And now the government, whenever they make policy, they consult us. They don't consult us as much as we would like, but I just wanted to share this example that it was very useful to meet every year, and slowly our conference from 2008, when we did the first conference, we had 305 participants. And in 2019, October last year, we had more than 3,000 women from all parts of the country. So the more we demanded with consistency, we saw the difference. We still have a long way to go, but I think that being persistent is very important, and increasing the number is also very important. And we are very happy to connect with all of you and would love to be part of international movement for women workers, farmers, and peasants. Thank you. Hello?
Thank you very much, Samina. So now I see we have someone else, Gadir Lavadens. Remember, everyone, if you would like to speak, you can just click this hand icon, should be in your screen. Gadir, you only have to unmute yourself now, so we can hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much for organizing this. My name is Gadir. I'm based in Bolivia, but I'm coordinator of the CBD Alliance, which is a global network that enables and enhances the participation of civil society in the Convention on Biological Diversity. So just I wanted to give a brief comment, and I have a couple of questions. So the first, well, as some of you may be aware of, the Convention on Biological Diversity has a strategic plan that ends this year in 2020. So the COP of this year is pretty important because a new strategic plan will be adopted. For this new strategic plan, Global Biodiversity Framework, as they call it, where civil society is pushing strongly for a rights-based approach, meaning human rights and meaning the UNDROP, UNDROP, to be included strongly in this new framework. We're looking for organizations working in both of these issues, of these frameworks, also these human rights frameworks, to get involved, to give advice on how to connect these processes, because we believe it's important to have them connected. And in that sense, I have a couple of questions. Then, for example, if there are any accountability or compliance mechanisms either in place or planned to be implemented in the UNDROP, because one of the biggest problems in the convention, in the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, is implementation. There are good, nice decisions, but at the end, they're not implemented really. So we're pushing also for accountability compliance in several ways, and we would like to know if there are others, not only in place, but those that you as civil society consider that are pushing for example, so we can also push for them or our connection with them in the CBD process. Then, unfortunately, I have to admit that in the dialogues in the CBD, engaging with some organizations, I see that there are some conflicts between UNDRIP and UNDROP. Not necessarily in terms of the content, but in terms of how organizations are understanding it, because many, let's not say many, but some organizations, indigenous organizations have some concerns about these other rights being adopted. And I was wondering if you have any comments or if you have any views on that. And of course, finally, if you see any relations, specific legal relations, but further relations between biodiversity and this UNDROP declaration and the possibilities of engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Gadir. Andrea, I think we are collecting, and maybe then you can answer afterwards. So I would now give the word to Melissa. Please go ahead, Melissa.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Well, hello everyone, and yeah, my name is Melissa Upreti. I am with the Center for Women's Global Leadership, which is based in Rutgers University. I'm very happy to have had the opportunity to listen in on this really interesting discussion. A number of things that the various speakers talked about are of great interest to me and would be to the Center for Women's Global Leadership, because we have been very involved in the work around the new ILO Convention 190 on violence and harassment. And prior to that, as some of you may know, CWGL is also the founder and global coordinator of the 16 Days campaign. It's one of the main founders. And looking at violence in the world of work, or just gender-based violence, has been obviously, a strong focus of the campaign over the years. And over the last couple of years, we've really been looking at gender-based violence in the world of work. This thematic prioritization has coincided with the process for the new ILO convention. So on listening, I know one of the speakers made direct reference to Convention 190, and I think one of the other speakers, a couple of them actually talked about issues that also are very relevant to this new convention. Given that we are currently focusing on, and will continue to do so, in alliance with, I think, almost 29 to 30 other organizations working at the global as well as regional and national levels to push for ratification and gendered implementation of this new convention, I just wanted to flag that we'd definitely be interested in continuing to engage with you and also the Via Campesinas campaign. I think there's lots of overlap, and rather than doing, of course, I think we have to do advocacy in our own respective spaces, but I think it's also important for us to think about where we might strategically sort of connect so that we can leverage each other's strengths as well. I have a lot more to say, but I'm not going to carry on for much longer. I just want to also flag that we do have an online platform. It's 16dayscampaign.org. I would like to request that you check that out to just take a look at how we've been showcasing issues, highlighting issues pertaining to workers in different sectors, and connecting that to the larger issue of gender-based violence, but also the ILO convention. And within that, looking at connections to labor rights, sexual and reproductive rights, as well as the broader issue of accountability And, you know, upon looking at that, if you feel like you'd like to make some connections to our work, then please do feel free to reach out. I would love to chat more with some of the speakers later, you know, but I just wanted to put that out there, say that the Center for Women's Global Leadership would be very interested in engaging with some of you around this to see how we can join forces. Thank you.
This is really great. Thank you. Thank you a lot, Melissa. Okay, if there is another question, then yeah, please raise your hand. If not, I guess we can maybe have a first round from the panelists, the speakers. All right. Okay, so I have maybe some comments on what Gadir raised, but I think first I would like to give the word to the other panelists. So Neti, Fatou, Gabriella, Kadin.
Let me just respond very briefly to that opening intervention around the International Day of Rural Women. That has been important, and I'm part of the civil society mechanism representation in Rome at the Committee on World Food Security. And as you know, every October the CFS has their major session. And we 2 years ago negotiated that, pressed for and got the a session on the International Day of Rural Women integrated into the program, the plenary program at the CFS sessions. And this year it looks like, and that was done for 2 years, and now this year it looks like it will be reslotted as a side event. And for me, that's an indication that the discourse on rural women is beginning to be, how shall I say, maybe threatening or a little unwelcome, because it's become a stronger voice and a more coherent and demanding voice. And that there's some attempt to diminish it and put women back in their traditional places. So just to note that that's not insignificant, and those are important markers that we continue to struggle to make to enlarge and hold our spaces as rural women in decision-making forums.
Great, thank you. Fatou, would you like to comment on something? Or Gabriella, Kaden?
No.
I can, excuse me, I can comment on the ILO 190 comment that was made. I'm sorry that my connection sort of cut out and then relogged me into the meeting, so I may have missed some of what was said. But basically, you know, thus far we've used the ILO 190, Convention 190 to structure our civil society submission to the UPR on the situation of low-wage women workers and sexual harassment in the workplace. And we'd certainly love to connect. You know, for the UPR submission, we focused a lot on the US and its labor standards and how, you know, the US has not ratified CEDAW and that it should. And we made several recommendations within our UPR on what the US could be doing in order to further combat sexual harassment and sexual violence in the workplace.
Great, thank you very much. Then maybe just to comment on what Gadir was asking. So in reference to this issue on UNDROP, So the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Actually, yesterday we had the participation of Norma Juan. She is part of the coordination of Indigenous women in Mexico, the platform of Indigenous women in Mexico. And she actually made a very important connection between UNDROP and UNDROP. Basically highlighting the gaps, but also how both instruments are, in a sense, compatible and also contributing to furthering very specific notions. And I would say that, of course, this is an issue that has been raised by some groups. And it is something that needs more discussion, of course, but I would suggest that there are two elements that are very important to consider. One would be we have to recognize the sources upon which UNDROP was created. And that means recognizing how the struggle of Indigenous peoples actually managed to change very important notions that were basic for UNDROP to happen. And I'm talking about collective rights, of course, the right to information, the right to participation, ethics, so free, prior, and informed consent. These are major landmarks, I think, and that really were very important for the negotiations. And the other thing I would say, or the second thing, in a much more formal way or in very legalistic speaking, is we have to go back to the interpretation, right? And the interpretation principles, I would say, first means we're talking about an international human rights instrument, so there should be no impairment of other human rights by applying one international human rights instrument. So that would be contradictory, simply. Then the other thing is that we have to interpret the declaration in its whole, right? So according to its purpose and its object. And this is really well explained in the preamble, and it is based largely or entirely in the non-discrimination principle. And the other is to find actually, and I agree, it's to talk more about it, but also to write more about how these rights are actually contributing to each other's struggles, right? So peasant struggles and Indigenous people struggles, where identities are not as divided as it appears to be from our conception, right? So people in rural areas are not only or Indigenous or peasants. So that is on that side. And then on the side of the accountability question, okay, so this is the very difficult question, and it's always the issue, of course, in this one of these international instruments, and such as the declaration. I think that La Vía Campesina is definitely in the process of also evaluating what are going to be the priorities within the UN human rights system. But I would say that immediately, and it would be good to hear what everyone else here thinks about it, because I see some people that I know have a stance on it. I think that implementation-wise, and maybe a fast track to accountability is looking at the local, national, and regional level, and finding ways to create accountability mechanisms that are not the usual ones. So we, of course, won't have in the near future a committee that's going to be reviewing and making concluding observations on the declaration, but we can make some national or regional structures, or we can create some structures that will allow us to implement its declaration in that way. But of course, this is, I would say, an obstacle that all international instruments face. So yes, that would be from my side. And then I don't know if we have some hands. Anyone else who would like to participate? Sorry, the sun is in my face. Yeah, I see Melissa.
Hi again. Yeah, I just want to respond to something that was said earlier. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but the person who talked about using 190 to structure the CSO submission for the UPR in the United States. With Claire? Katie, okay. Thank you. Which I think is an excellent example that more people need to hear about. You know, one of the discussions we've been having with our allies around C-190, now that it's been formally adopted, obviously is around ratification. And it's not going to come into effect until a second member state ratifies. And even then, it'll only come into effect 1 year after that. So for it to hit the ground, we are really looking at, you know, 3 to 5 years at a minimum. In the meantime, what we've been advocating for is, or, you know, talking about is really focusing on how to promote the use of these new minimum standards to inspire new conversations, or how they can be utilized even prior to ratification to push for law reform, to examine existing laws at the national level, and also to be used at very local levels as well. So not waiting for a central government or a federal government to ratify. And I think this is an excellent example of how it is being utilized. We do, of course, know that there are other international treaties that have provisions that also apply, but having a dedicated convention, of course, has given this whole issue of violence and harassment very specific focus, and the broad definitions have added something new as well to the conversation. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to say, in the spirit of sort of, you know, collaborating and building on today's conversation, and what I've learned is, for example, the 16 days platform, we do invite contributions, we invite blog posts. So it would be wonderful if maybe you could write about this and we could put up a blog post, because this is then going to inspire others to think about how to start using the minimum standards that have been adopted, and, you know, rather than waiting for ratification to happen. It's just an example of how we can sort of put the wheels of accountability into motion through, you know, different channels. We don't have to always wait for a formal mechanism to exist or to be there to operationalize something. So I just wanted to express that thought, yeah, and just invite, you know, a contribution for our website, and I can reach out more specifically later on.
I think this is great. And also, I mean, we are in the phase of implementation, and it is important that we make all of these instruments stronger. And this is only possible if we have this collective interpretation. So I see someone else. Hala.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to express my thanks for this meeting, this online meeting. I learned a lot today. I listened to very interesting presentations and discussions, and I feel I'm from Egypt, and I feel like we really, I mean, this is very inspiring to try and work more on implementation of the UNDROP and build on it. One of the main concerns that we have in Egypt regarding women peasants is the situation of land, of how much land do women actually own, which is unfortunately, let's say, discriminated against through laws of inheritance, but also through traditions, mostly through the traditions, really. So this is one thing that I'd really like to work on, and maybe collaborate with other others who are also interested and working on the same, and see what has been done, and try to learn from it. So I'm looking forward to doing more on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For those French speakers that are here with us today, tomorrow we will also have this webinar in French with different panelists. So in case you would like to join, or someone else from your organization would like to join, then you are really welcome. I don't know, we still have time. We have 10 more minutes. If somebody else would like to say something, I see Neti's camera, so maybe Neti, you would like to say something.
Could I just respond to this this very important intervention that we just heard from Hala around the traditions of land ownership? That's not unique to Egypt, that's global, that land ownership and control over land has been deeply patriarchal. That's in our own circumstance too. And let me just say something about the context here. When land in the part of the world where I live was allocated, it was allocated to and purchased by men. And over the years, we in the National Farmers Union and other organizations in Canada, we rural women, struggled for equality there. And we came to the place where we got a fairly major shift, and on a lot of so-called family farms that had been in the name of and titled to the males in the family, we then got a lot of women who took equal ownership, and we got our names on the titles of the land, and thought that that was and it was a significant step forward. Now, in a context of heightened capitalism and more investment in land, we see that the gains that we made are being undermined by the investors, the corporate sector that is buying huge packages of land, and those investors are predominantly male. So now we're moving back to a place, and this is discouraging, but we need to take on the next battle here around land ownership. We're seeing that that the corporate and investor capitalists are in fact usurping and undermining the gains that women have made in some places of the world in asserting their ownership and control over land.
Thank you, Neti. Yeah, Fatou?
Yes, I just want to comment on what he has already said. I think all parties should collaborate to develop and functionally evaluate the system of, to assess the impact of legalization of land. All parties should join together because it is globally. This land issue is globally, not only there. It's even in Gambia. Some of the women where they work, their working place, they have relocated them from there to another place, which doesn't favor them. So I think this is globally. So all parties should join together and make something out of it. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. Yes, so that is, I would say, if anyone else would like to comment or say something, please feel free. We will circulate PowerPoints, and the webinar will be uploaded, so you will be able to share it or watch it. And I see some comments from the panelists, from participants. Okay, so in case that there is no further comments, then I guess that we can leave it to here. I think that we've had very important discussion on implementation, converging different instruments and interpretations on the same issues. And I think that, yeah, the idea was that we have had a space to speak more about what is the meaning of UNDROP for women's struggles from now on, not so to present UNDROP, but more this discussion of implementation. And I think we really had this discussion. So yeah, we will have a series. So we still need to have a webinar series in April and in May. In April, we will have one on seeds and biodiversity, and in May on climate justice and UNDROP, so the same focus. And let's see, yeah, where we go from here. I think that there's a lot of work to be done, and hopefully we stay in touch.
Thank you,
yeah.
Andrea. And just
You can also have access to yesterday's webinar. Yes.
exactly. Yeah, I just wanted to say there were some questions. We can share the emails of the panelists, so you can exchange further after that webinar, and I can also send the webinar of yesterday. And of course, we will, as we said, send around the webinar for those who were not able to attend. Maybe you also know somebody who has not had the opportunity to attend, and also the PowerPoints in case they were not could not be seen during this webinar. So we will make sure that we have each other's contacts and can contact each other afterwards.
Yeah, and also if you want to be part of the next webinar series, please just follow Fian. You can follow Fian at Twitter or Facebook, and we will keep uploading our events there, also circulating them. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists, and I hope everybody stays safe. Have a very wonderful day, evening, or morning.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.